podcast you're about to listen to is from a book series on post-qualitative, new materialist and critical posthumanist research. I'm Karin Murris and chief editor of this new Routledge series. You can find it on the following website, www.postqualitativeresearch.com.
Welcome, everyone, to our podcast on our book, Postdigital Play and Global Education, Reconfiguring Research. I'm here today with three of my co-authors. I'm Kerryn Dixon. I'm going to let the other three introduce themselves so you can hear their voices.
Hi, I'm Karin Murris, and I usually refer to as Mur, but it's a group of co-authors, which has a little bit of a history in the sense that Kerryn Dixon and myself, we worked at the same time at the University of the Witwatersrand, and Kerryn and Karin was very confusing. And then it started that I called her Dix and she called me Mur, and then that continued into this team, and I now hand over to one of the other co-authors, Giorza.
Hi everybody. My name is Theresa Giorza, and commonly known as Jaws, nothing to do with sharks, but also something that began in high school, and this group somehow took it up as well in this tradition of surnames that we seem to have developed.
Hi everybody, I'm Joanne Piers. When we all joined together in this incredible riding of big waves together, I was Joanne Piers, and then I became Piers, and then I became Dr. Piers. So a lot has happened with names and titles as well, and many different countries. So yeah, it's good to be here and do this podcast together with all of you.
So this book has quite a long and interesting history. But I want to start at its unusual beginning. It started because we were involved in an international research project, but this book doesn't take the usual route of expanding reported findings. It went on in a different direction, and it took us quite a long time to get to the book being produced. But I think it's important that we set the scene about how the book comes to be. And Mara, would you like to talk a little bit about how we got to that point?
Thanks, Dix. Laughter has been so much our companion.
By your dog's name.
I can try. I was, gosh, it seems such a long time ago now, but I was emailed by Jackie Marsh from the University of Sheffield about 6 years ago now, I think. And she knew about my work in child studies, and I was working at the University of Cape Town then, and she wondered if I would like to be the principal investigator of a project called Children, Technology and Play, CTAP for short, and funded by Lego Foundation. Now, they were looking for a partner in South Africa who was willing to work with children and families, especially in resource-constrained environments in South Africa. And yeah, I really jumped at the opportunity. But we needed to get started very quickly because of very tight deadlines. It felt a little bit like a kind of afterthought to include South Africa. And fortunately, luckily, many of the people who would be ideal for the project were coming together anyway at an annual literacy conference at the time in South Africa. So in Cape Town, actually, as a matter of fact. So practical, when we were there at lunchtime, I'll never forget, and we actually write about this explicitly in the introduction, how the practical question, they just swirled around us at the table as we were combining eating with thinking about, what this project would entail, some of its complexity in particular. Very quickly, all sorts of discomforting questions started to emerge about researching the children that we were working and living with at the time. And these were ethical, political, and epistemological and ontological questions that really mattered for us. And what we find in the report that was officially published after we'd started, it was, yeah, there were a lot of these kind of questions that didn't come up, or at least, yeah, didn't find a place that we really felt it deserved. So just to give you an example, the research design really assumed a kind of dominant discourse about children that live in well-resourced environments with access to Wi-Fi and having tech devices. And however, the children and the families that we knew and were working with were exceptions to that rule, which caused real dilemmas for us about how we collected the data and wrote about these children. So this might sound a bit confusing, but there were two parts. We did the research, and then in the returning, as we were writing this book, we found it opened up spaces to do it differently. But it is crucial to say that this book is not a critique of the report. You know, we don't see that this kind of research is a kind of deletion or inserting something that we think is necessarily better. That's not the point. The point is that we very much affirmatively engage with the research that we did with our colleagues in Sheffield and Lego Foundation. So the book is about some of these challenges and how they inspire a different way of doing research, especially important for children of families in the South. And it's about stopping to think about how our instruments that are shaped by maybe by good neoliberal intentions perpetuate inequalities.
Yeah, and I think that was in some ways the driving force for us, Mara, about how we think about doing research differently. And I think that's had a really strong impact on all of us, you know, in writing the book and after writing the book, about how we think about research. But what was also really important for us are the stories that we kept telling each other during the research and afterwards that were the impetus for writing the book. And so we stay with stories, and they're really important. They perform in our research, and they keep pulling us in. They invited us to return. And we really like the lines from Van Duren and Rose that tell us that stories hold open possibilities and interpretation and refuse the kind of closure that prevents others from speaking or becoming. And we hope that that's part of the experience when readers read the book. And so what we've tried to do is have stories that we think are post-digitally playful. We've worked with them as transmodal vignettes. So they're not these little self-contained things that live on their own, but they're like photographic vignettes who have got blurry edges, where things are in shadow, where you can't always tell where the beginnings and endings are. And they also cross the chapters. They pop up in other places. And they're a reminder that the research lenses that we use, like camera lenses, are always implicated in what comes to be focused on. And so we hope when people read and engage with these vignettes, they're also thinking about the ways that we've tried to decenter human beings, and thinking about how we can follow the flows between humans and technology and places and spaces and times, the research apparatuses that were part of the project that expand our ontologies of knowing and becoming and doing.
Yeah, and I'm listening to you and Murris, and it makes me feel like I want to go and pick up the book, but it feels like the book might be this big map that as you pick it up off the shelf, all these different games will just fall out of them, because like you just said, it's, you know, that it's playful and playful in a serious way, and feels like coming back and listening to this podcast again at another time would also be one of those memories of how we've worked together for such a long period of time. And what sort of came up quite a lot in listening to the two of you now is that there's so many different important concepts scattered around in this book, but also in the way that we speak of the research. So hearing things like the concept of posthumanism, postdigital, vignettes, non-representational, play, reconfiguring. And what I appreciate is how in chapter 1 of the book specifically, there is this opportunity to really sit with those concepts and the way that it supports any researcher or any reader who would come along to have the time to try and digest some of these concepts. And I think that that's been something really valuable for me in reading the book. But I'm wondering if maybe we could now think, maybe Giorza, you want to come in here. If we just thought for a moment about what it means for a book and research, for that matter, to be written from a post-human orientation. Maybe what is so important about post, and how does it enable us to reconfigure research, and more importantly, why does this matter so much for us?
Thanks, Piers. Yeah, I think the post, in a way, being a concept in itself, has been so central and spread throughout the book. In our title, the post-digital comes to the fore, and while post-developmental, post-human, post in all different ways, are discussed in chapter 1 and 2. The taking post-humanist, feminist, new materialist perspectives, I think in a very general way, do this thing of disrupting the idea of actually isolating objects in reality as kind of value neutral. So it kind of disrupts that whole idea of how we see the world. So the original research questions related to digital and non-digital play in a way that kind of disturbed us a lot in terms of this way that we are conceiving reality in much more relational, connected ways. And a lot of the assumptions about who our participants were, the fact that one could kind of envisage, as Dixon was saying, that this conception of conceiving of the participants in particular ways, and therefore asking questions that related only possibly to middle class children, came out so strongly. So these questions rubbed against the emerging sense we had about what the children in the study really had to share, and how the binary of the digital and the non-digital really didn't work in the lives of the participants. So questions arose for us when participants responded to our research questions and activities in totally unexpected ways. For example, encounters between the research design and the field threw up what we recognized then as ethical questions and concerns that related directly to all these posts that we were grappling with.
And Giorza, I mean, I think there's something really fascinating about, once we think about the post-digital and don't work in that binary, how that also helped us reconfigure play.
Yeah. So we were kind of treading into this very well trampled ground of play, research into play, and the emerging kind of new field of digital play, which had become a new kind of taxonomy, if you like. And I think, as a team of researchers already interested in troubling age on the one hand and the concept of kind of multi-species, those tropes kind of emerged in our engagement with play, and that became really exciting. So we play with play, and we play in between a number of binaries, including adult-child, animal-human, technology, and sense.
Yeah, it really strikes me listening to what you're saying, and it reminds me what I really liked about chapter 2 is also the important decolonizing dimension of what you're now just talking about, of the post-digital. I'm just wondering, maybe you can say a little bit more about that, Giorza?
Yeah, so our use of the post-digital, that concept, helped us to notice, I think, the entanglement of play worlding with the realities of justice and the inseparability of issues of play and those relations of North and South, and the complexity of this conception of North and South. Ideas about developed and underdeveloped. The home space interactions involving child, toy, internet, imagination, Furbies, those examples, you know, a number of examples from the literature are already contaminated and entangled with other strongly related realities like those of child labor, child soldiers in the DRC, the mining of minerals for digital technology. And these are connections and relations of responsibility that came to the fore in our explorations. So this thing about what is post-digital is really what we try and grapple with in chapter 2. And what was happening with the children, where they were refusing certain questions from the research, really kind of disrupted our process and made us kind of think again and think differently. And because we responded to these and discovered, I think, for ourselves the real enacted meaning of this concept of post-digital. You know, we could have ridden over some of those things from the focus groups. It would have been much easier, but I think we embraced those really challenging responses from our participants. So the stuff around technology and the way that the digital can be constructed as a binary, you know, the digital versus the non-digital, the online versus the offline. When one thinks about technology as being a lack, you know, when you work in so-called under-resourced environments, then, you know, you sit with this deficit view in which you're always trying to make up for what is not there, for inadequacy perhaps. But when we recognize that our worlds are inescapably digital and connected, we're more open to notice the creativity, the incredible flexibility in the ways that people work with technology, however limited their access. And that was true for our participants. So thinking about children's play as post-digital theorizes us out of that binary. So chapter 2 and 6, Dixon, where we're talking about the children, for example, engaging with the World Wrestling, the WWE SmackDown, and really kind of sitting with the questions about, you know, the appropriateness of that kind of play, the gaming and the playing that breaks those binaries of adult and child, and particularly that kind of product that is kind of defying clear binaries. And then we also argue the human and the animal. So
yeah. And very much at the heart of that was drawing on not only, but Karen Barad's agential realism has been really central, hasn't it, in this kind of reconfiguring of agency and the troubling of these binaries. And of course, these binaries, they're power producing, right? The ones that you were talking about, human over animal and adult over child, and the importance of disrupting that in also that kind of decolonizing post-digital work. I think, what the book very much does, it's picked up explicitly in chapter 6, but throughout, it's the reconfiguring of agency, and not only child agency, but thinking about agency as one that involves much more than what we normally think agency is. We tend to think that it's about the intention of a human and his or her will to do something. But what I think our book does differently is opening up ways in which we think about or can think about agency that doesn't just involve an individual human self that moves through time and is located in a particular space and place, but that it really troubles the idea that there is only a self that has access to particular languages and advanced semiotic capabilities, because it very much exclude many kind of either creatures or things or bodies in the broad sense of the word, like animals, matter of other kinds, digital cameras, or creatures that haven't been credited with those abilities at all, the so-called not yet fully humans, such as children or differently abled and indigenous peoples. And there are some really powerful examples in our book about how the octopus and the sackball and the GoPro cameras, our iPhones, are all part of agency. So yeah, we disrupt also other kind of binaries. You've already mentioned quite a few, Giorza, but like individual, social, animate, inanimate, and especially the core dichotomy, culture, nature. Anyway, I'll come off my soapbox now. What do you think, Piers?
Yeah, I was just thinking about like the ways in which those different examples keep threading through all these different research reconfigurings, and like you mentioned, the octopus, the GoPro, and it's not easy thinking and pursuing research in this way, but so necessary. And I think that was the driving force for all of us, because of the coming back to the conversation about discomfort, that it was through the discomfort that we were willing to stay with, that we felt compelled and allowed these discomforts to take us for a walk, for a swim, for a meal around a table, for Zoom meetings across different time zones, in order to do justice to these different concepts that we're working with in research, through the events and the stories and the vignettes that include the contributions and the data and the participants, not as these separate parts of a project in a linear sequence. Yeah.
Yeah, Joanne, do you want to give an example of one of the things that stands out for you that was important to do justice to this to the stories and what we were a part of?
How much time do we have? No, I think I appreciate you asking me that, because I think that I mean, you were chatting about this before, and it's very strong in my memory of the journey with this book, is, you know, the work of chapter 4, chapter 3, chapter 4, and chapter 5 in particular, because of the spatial realities and how much our bodies and our the disturbances that were happening in the research instruments and the design, because there were these incredible pushbacks from, I think it's like what Joe said earlier, from the children, from the land, from the GoPro, from the picture books, just this vibrant, ongoing resistance, you know, not in a way that was one or the other, but it was just like this multiple moments in an ongoing force going on throughout the different parts of the research. And what it meant was that we could really feel it in our beings as researchers, feel it in our bones, the very enactment of cascading. So you ask one question about why are we interviewing using these questions when we know that a family doesn't have a car? Why would we need to ask them how many cars they have? You know, so then it troubles why that question is even there in the first place, and also makes us really see the materiality of creating deficit, because we have to ask these questions. So you ask that question, and then before you know it, there's another question, and I think that's how it happened in the writing of this book. And transcripts, and then the next thing, you know, was like, well, what wasn't transcribed and what was transcribed? And, you know, just thinking about in chapter 3, Eshal and Henry, and the ways in which they became part of the researchers as well, the ones that were actually asking the questions. And it continued even into research sites. And it was difficult. I think it's important to say that repeatedly, because this is not it's not light work. It's not light research work. It's heavy and swampy. You know, the water isn't easy to move through. But this collective way in which we worked, yeah, it really did justice to being able to stay with a question that just kept haunting us over and over and over again, even long after the project was completed. And I can see how much that's, you know, transposed itself into my PhD research, and I'm so grateful for that. Yeah, thanks, Liz.
Yeah, and living with what it means to be implicated in these processes, I think, is something that we grappled with during the project, but also in the writing and afterwards. Mara, could I ask you a question about why you think this book is important for you, and what do you think it offers researchers?
Yeah, I think, you know, following on from what Piers was just sort of, yeah, again, it struck me and really moved by the difficulty really of doing this kind of research. And so for me, the one of the strands, the dimensions of the book has got this really sort of complex layer, is doing justice to the complexity of reality when analyzing data, and the reality of what it was like on the ground. And so that's why I so take to a post-humanist ontology, because I do feel that it does makes it possible to analyze data fragments that just stay with the specificity of these examples and pay attention, attuned to much more than what we normally do when we do it from a human-centered perspective, which doesn't mean that that's a waste of time. You know, I think you can do both. And secondly, I think we make some very important or show the important ontological move you make when you do post-qualitative research, post-humanist research. And we do this in two different ways. I think we engage at a deep philosophical level with what it means to move what we call in the book in chapter 3, the world of objects, the world of subjects, and then how we move to the world of phenomena as a way of showing the importance of this ontological shift for how we approach knowledge and how we analyze data, but also for the ethics and the politics of our research practices. And I think what I very much notice in my own, my job, but also in supervising students and as a reviewer, is that the difficulty of enacting post-humanist philosophies and do research differently. And I really feel that this book is very much, doing this theory practice kind of work where it's a very practical book, but it's also a very philosophical book at the same time. The two go hand in hand. Would you agree with that, Dix?
Yeah, I think so. And I think for each of us, it really has made us spend a lot of time in the specificity of things. And I think part of the reconfiguring work that we do does ask big questions like what's the global, and the ways in which something like a concept like the global is deeply political. And when we're thinking about, universal designs, but we're also thinking about, developmental discourses that all children are the same or play the same, or we can have a particular taxonomy and we can just map children from a range of places and spaces and histories, and they, use the same tools. It makes us think about things differently. And so, staying with the specificity of what we were doing also makes us see the ways in which the global works in often iniquitous ways. Joanne was talking about the research tools and instruments, but also the way that Chanique, who was our transcriber and did extraordinary work with us, tells stories about place that I think often get completely erased. And I think we sat a lot with silences and erasures in thinking about what happens when we think about the global and not the kinds of stories that aren't always told in the way that we work. And I suppose that's part of the decolonizing impetus of the book as well. Yeah. Giorza, do you want to pick up on that?
Before she does, I think in chapter 4 there is a QR code, isn't there, where Chanique talks about exactly that. That might be really worth for people listening to. Yeah.
In fact, there's great QR codes across the book with images because we tried not to only be working with just the printed word.
I think you're on mute, Giorza. Giorza, you're on mute, which actually is part of the book. That's how we wrote this book. Because, sometimes it would just require communicating across a WhatsApp group with a video on, we transfer the rest of it. So it makes complete sense that you're on mute.
Of course, space and time and matter and species. And where are your dogs, Joanne? Yeah, I can't remember what I was saying. Oh, I was going to say.
It was about what was one of the things, coming towards the close now, what was one of the things that really mattered for you and was most important for you in the book?
Oh, and well, you mentioned the drawings, and I was just saying how how it was great to work not just with the text and to include drawings of us online, and then to send you line drawings, and then you play in Canva, and then it becomes something else. That was brilliant. And then yeah. And just to say, the collaborative nature of the writing was really something special for me. And I've learned so much about the possibilities that really engenders, working across continents, across experiences, building stories together, and really feeling a sense of responsibility to one another. And yeah, so it's been great. And then working with the participants was magical. So again, like huge unexpected insights and learning. That I hope come across in those chapters, because I felt that in the whole thing about agency, we wanted to talk about how we disrupt this idea of human agency. And I think it's that energy that flows kind of between and among all the phenomena that make up the research and the book and the research relationships. Yeah.
So I guess it's my turn now, because everybody said their turn to share what was important for them. And then, of course, in the way that we would, I'll end my little bit with last word from Eshel. I think when I started being a researcher on this CTAP project, which was through the University of Cape Town at the time, and I was flung into opportunity, and what keeps traveling with me. I mean, I was actually at UCT yesterday, working with some master students, and I had all of you in the room with me, because one of the really crucial parts of me being a researcher is knowing that it's in the doing. It's not only in the identifying what isn't working and how things shouldn't be. And I think there's a lot of research where the project's objective is to work with deficit and what's the problem, and then writing about the problem. And there's more than enough of that. And actually, who does it serve, and who benefits from that approach? And this project, from the research, from the time that we sat at that table and the papers were flying all over the place, right to the point of finalizing the last runs before it got printed, it always spoke of continuing to go beyond that which can be predetermined, So when I can stand in a lecture room like yesterday with a group of master students, I'm enabled by the experience that I've had with all of you to be able to speak about going beyond, because we've already experimented beyond. And something like Chanique, having been a transcriber, becoming author, part of selecting data for transcription, and how much all of it is encapsulated in how we even had this event at the end of long after the project had happened, where all the participants and families came together. And what else was present there is the different ways in which we approached a new research project, with working with selecting researchers who we knew would be able to work with indigenous languages of the Western Cape, so that the research instruments weren't the only determining factor of what happens inside of a home. So I think that's the big part for me about the ongoingness of the pushing further and further, and being willing to be being willing to answer the questions that we ask, like letting those questions ask us and we have to follow them. So, like in Eshal with the picture book that wasn't even a part of the project, sitting there, I'm saying, I can't believe that what this book offers. It's one of her library books, and I say that it's doing so many things. It's telling stories and it's giving facts. And then for her to respond and say, you see, with a question, as a way of going, well, I mean, maybe you would have noticed that if you had been open enough to actually think about, what else is going on. So, I mean, that's a perfect way to encapsulate the experience for me, is that when you are willing to go into risky spaces with research, it's just such a generative space, because you hear the voices of what can be quite invisible. So yeah, that's my thank you to all of you, actually, for the entire journey of so many years together. Thanks.
Well, thank you, all of you. And yeah, we hope you're going to enjoy dipping in and out of our book. And yeah, thank you.
And to be like a show and see.
And see, exactly.
Yeah.
With nine brains and in each tentacle, in a tentacular way.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you would like to know more about this chapter, please visit the website www.postqualitativeresearch.com, and please stay tuned for future podcasts.